Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Rajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Marani ki, Jai. Gonitai ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Good morning. Reading from Canto 10, Chapter 87, Text 15, which has quite long purport. Brihad upalabdam etad avayanti avasheshataya. Yata udayastam ayav vikrite mridi vavikritat. Atari shayodadus tvai mano vachana charitam. Katamayata bhavanti bhuvi data padani. Brihadupalabdam etadavyanti avasheshataya. Yata udayastam ayav vikrite mridi vavikritat. Atarishayo dadus tvai mano vachana charitam. Katamayata bhavanti bhuvi data padani. Oh, there's a second part to it. I missed the second part of the last word because it was on a completely different line. Brihadupalabdam etadavyayanti avasheshatastaya. Yata udayastam ayav vikrite mridi vavikritat. Atarishayo-dadus tvai mano vachana charitam. Katamayata bhavanti bhuvi data padani nirnam. Please chant. Brihadupatalavyayanti avasheshataya. Yata udaya samayo vikrite mriti bavikritat. Atari shrayo dadustvayi mano vachana charitam. Katamayata bhavanti bhuvi tata padani nirnam. Word for word. Brihat, as the supreme. Upalabdam, perceived. Etat, this world. Abhayanti, they consider. Avasheshataya, in terms of its being the all-pervading foundation of existence. Yata, since. Udaya, the generation. Astam eyao, and dissolution. Vikrite, of a transformation. Mridi, of clay. Va, as if. Avikritat, the supreme itself, not being subject to transformation. Ata, therefore. Rishaya, the sages who compiled the Vedic mantras. Dadu, placed. Tvayi, in you. Mana, their minds. Vachana, words. Acharitam, and actions. Katam, how. Ayata, not as they are. Bhavanti, become. Bhuvi, upon the ground. Datta, placed. Padani, the steps. Nirnam, of men. And the translation. This perceivable world is identified with the Supreme, because the Supreme Brahman is the ultimate foundation of all existence, remaining unchanged as all created things are generated from it and at last dissolved into it, just as clay remains unchanged by the products made from it and again merged with it. Thus it is towards you alone that the Vedic sages direct all their thoughts, words, and acts. After all, how can the footsteps of men fail to touch the earth on which they live? And the purport to this verse. There may be some doubt as to whether the Vedic mantras are unanimous when identifying the Supreme Personality of Godhead. After all, some mantras state, Indro yato vajritasya raja. Indra is the king of all moving and non-moving beings. That's from the Rig Veda 132.15. While others say, Agnir Murda Diva. Agni is the chief of the heavens. And yet other mantras point to different deities as the absolute. It would seem then that the Vedas present a polytheistic worldview. Answering this doubt, the Vedas themselves explain in this verse that there can be only one source of universal creation called Brahman, or Brihat, the greatest, which is the singular truth underlying and pervading all existence. No finite deity like Indra or Agni can fulfill this unique role, nor would the Shrutis be so ignorant as to propose such an idea. As indicated here by the word Tvayi, Lord Vishnu alone is the absolute truth. Indra and other demigods may be glorified in various ways, but they possess only those powers Lord Sri Vishnu has granted them. The Vedic sages understand that this entire world, including Indra, Agni, and everything else perceivable by the eyes, ears, and other senses, is identical with the one supreme truth, the personality of Godhead, who is called Brihat, the greatest, because he is Abhishesha, the ultimate substance that remains. So from the Lord, everything expands as creation, and into him everything dissolves at annihilation. He exists before and after the material manifestation as the constant basis, known to philosophers as the ingredient cause, upadana. Despite the fact that countless manifestations emanate from him, the Supreme Lord exists eternally unchanged, an idea the Shruti specifically emphasize here with the word abhikritat. The words mirdiva, as in the case of clay, allude to a famous analogy spoken by Uddalaka to his son Svetaketu in the Chandogya Upanishad 641. Vacharam banam vikaro hamadeyam vritiketi eva satyam. The objects of the material world exist merely as names, transformations defined by language, whereas the ingredient cause, like the clay from which pots are made, is the actual reality. A mass of clay is the ingredient cause of various pots, statues, and so on, but the clay itself remains in its essence unchanged. Eventually, the pots and other objects will be destroyed and return to the clay from which they came. Similarly, the Supreme Lord is the total ingredient cause, yet he remains eternally untouched by transformation. This is the purport of the statement. Sarvam Kalavidam Brahma. Everything is Brahman. Chandogya Upanishad 3.14.1. Wondering at this mystery, the great devotee Gajendra prayed, Namo Namas Te Kila Karanaya Nishkaranaya Bhuta Karanaya. Obeisances again and again to you, the source of all creation. You are the inconceivable cause of all causes, and of you there is no other cause. Bhagavatam 8.3.15. Prakriti, material nature, is often considered the ingredient cause of creation in Western science as well as in the Vedas. This does not contradict the higher fact of the Supreme Lord's being the final cause, since Prakriti is his energy and is herself subject to change. In Srimad Bhagavatam 11.24.19, Lord Krishna says, Prakriti yasyo padanam adhara purusha para. Sato bhivyanya kalo brahma tat tritayam tva'aham. The material universe is real, having Prakriti as its original ingredient and final state. Lord Mahavishnu is the resting place of nature, which becomes manifest by the power of time. Thus, nature, the Almighty Vishnu, and time are not different from me, the Supreme Absolute Truth. Prakriti, however, undergoes transformation, while the Lord, the Supreme Purusha, does not. Prakriti is the personality of Godhead's external energy, but he has another energy, his internal energy, which is Svarumbhuta, none different from his very essence. The Lord's internal energy, like himself, is never subject to material change. Therefore, the mantras of the Vedas, along with the rishis who have received these, manifest these mantras in meditation and transmitted them for the benefit of mankind, direct their attention primarily towards the personality of Godhead. The Vedic sages direct the activities of their minds and words, that is to say, the inner as well as the literal meaning, abhitavriti, of their utterances, first of all towards him, and only secondarily towards separated transformations of Prakriti, such as Indra and other demigods. Just as a man's Just as a man's footsteps, whether placed on mud, stones, or bricks, cannot fail to touch the surface of the earth, so whatever the Vedas discuss within the realm of material generation, they relate to the absolute truth. Mundane literature describes limited phenomena, disregarding the relation of its subjects to the total reality, but the Vedas always focus their perfect vision on the supreme. As the Chandogya Upanishad affirms in its statements, Vritiketi eva satyam and sarvam kali idam brahma. Reality is understood properly when everything is seen to be dependent on Brahman, the absolute, for its existence. Brahman alone is real, not because nothing we see in this world is real, but because Brahman is the absolute, final cause of everything. Thus, the word satyam, as used in the phrase Mritiketi eva satyam, has been defined in another context as ingredient cause, by no less an authority than Lord Krishna himself. Yad upadaya purvastu bhavo vikurute param adir anto yada yasya tat satyam abhidiyate. A material object itself comprised of an essential ingredient creates another material object through transformation. In this way, one created object becomes the cause and basis of another created object. A particular thing may be called real in that it possesses the basic nature of another object that constitutes its cause and original state. That's S.B.10.87.15. 18. Explaining the word Brahman, Srila Prabhupada writes in Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, quote, the word Brahman indicates the greatest of all and the maintainer of everything. The impersonalists are attracted to the greatness of the sky, but because of their poor fund of knowledge, they are not attracted to the greatness of Krishna. In our practical life, however, we are attracted by the greatness of a person and not by the greatness of a big mountain. Actually, the term Brahman actually applies to Krishna only. Therefore, in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna admitted that Lord Krishna is the Para-Brahman, or the supreme rest of everything. Krishna is the supreme, so quote, Krishna is the supreme Brahman because of his unlimited knowledge, unlimited potencies, unlimited strength, unlimited influence, unlimited beauty, and unlimited renunciation. Therefore, the word Brahman can be applied to Krishna only. Arjuna affirms that because the impersonal Brahman is the effulgence emanating as rays of Krishna's transcendental body, Krishna is the Para-Brahman. Everything is resting on Brahman, but Brahman itself is resting on Krishna. Therefore, Krishna is the ultimate Brahman, or Para-Brahman. The material elements are accepted as inferior energy of Krishna because by their interaction, the cosmic manifestation takes place, rests on Krishna, and after dissolution again enters into the body of Krishna as his subtle energy. Krishna is therefore the cause of both manifestation and dissolution. Close quote. In summary, Srila Sridhar Swami prays, Druhina yani Ravindra Mukhamara Jagat idam nabhavet pritag utitam Bahu Mukhair api mantra panar ajas Tvam uru murtir ato vinigadyase. Translation: the demigods headed by Shiva, Agni, Surya, and Indra, and indeed all beings in the universe, do not come into existence independently of you. The mantras of the Vedas, though they speak from various viewpoints, all speak about you, the unborn Lord, appearing in numerous forms. Very, 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 very long purport. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gnanjana Shlakaya Chakshu Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopustam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swarupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadanti Kam Vandeham Shri Guru Juta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Rakutam Pitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitam Shah. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapsa Kanchana Gorangi Radha Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Suti Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpataribhyas Kripa Sindhuve Vachapatitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shimata Roma Padaswami Iti Namine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimata Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, to create a context for this particular verse that we're reading today, I'm going to reference a BBT purport from text 13, which says, even though the Vedas knew the Lord being omniscient, does not need to be informed of his glories. They enthusiastically took this opportunity to praise him. So that's what's taking place here. The Vedas are praising the Supreme Lord, even though he didn't need to be informed of his glories, but they're doing it very enthusiastically. So this is the second of the 28 prayers that the personified Vedas make or give. And those prayers, they started from the previous verse and they proceed to text 41. And they represent the opinion of each of the 28 major Shrutis. So we're on the second of these. So from the BBT purport to text 14, the previous text, there is mention of the approaches of to the absolute truth on the part of the Upanishads and the Shrutis, because they're approaching the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the Upanishads direct their attention to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, first by negating what is distinct from him, and then defining some of his important characteristics. So that's their method. And stated in the BBT purport to text 14, also, it says that the Shrutis emphasize pure unalloyed service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and those particular Shrutis are considered to be the supreme in their approach. So, that's the context of what's happening in this verse. So, in the text 13 purport, there's also mentioned that the Vedas are the first emanation from the breathing of Mahavishnu. And meaning in personified form, they serve him by waking him from his mystic slumber. So that's what they're doing in a personal form. So this is the description. This part that we're reading, this is the description from Sanadana, who says, quote, this is Sanadana speaking, after the Supreme Lord withdrew the universe he had previously created, he lay for some time as if asleep, and all his energies rested dormant within him. When the time came for the next creation, the personified Vedas awakened him by chanting his glories, just as the poets serving a king approach him at dawn and awaken him by reciting his heroic deeds. So that's the comparison that's made. So that came from text 13. So that's the context of what's happening. So in this text, text 15, it's the second Shruti who is chanting the glories of Mahavishnu. And particularly, the Shruti is defining the important characteristics. So how the Shruti is putting it is that this perceivable world is identified with the Supreme because the Supreme Brahman is the ultimate foundation of all existence. So meaning anything that exists is Brahman, it's spirit. So this world that we can perceive is identified with that Supreme Brahman. So Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in commenting on this particular text, he has a kind of dialogue that happens between Mahavishnu and the Vedas, the personified Vedas. So he has Mahavishnu challenging the Vedas. So he says to them, but you, the Shrutis, call not only the Supreme Lord, but you say that other demigods are the Supreme in verses like the following. So he gives examples. So he's challenging them. But you know, you're saying I'm Supreme, but you're also calling other demigods Supreme. So he gives examples. There's a verse, Yato Vashishtaya Raja. Indra is the Supreme King of all moving and non-moving things. So that's from the Rig Veda. So Mahavishnu is telling them, look, this is what you say. And he gives another example. He says that they say, Agni Murta Diwali. Agni is the chief of the heavens. So these and other mantras point to different deities as the absolute. So it would seem then that the Vedas present a pantheistic view. So this is the challenge of Mahavishnu to the personified Vedas. So the response on the part of the Shrutis, especially the Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who has it in a conversational form, a dialogue, this is how they respond. They say, yes, this is true, but it is a logical necessity that there can be only one source of universal creation called Brahman, or Brihad, the greatest, which is the singular truth, underlying and pervading all existence. So they make that grand statement. No finite demigod like Indra or Agni can fulfill this unique role. Lord Vishnu alone is the absolute truth. Indra and the other demigods may be glorified in various ways, but they possess only those powers Lord Sri Vishnu has granted them. So that's the Veda's response when they are challenged by Mahavishnu, that they're calling other demigods also supreme. So this is how they respond. True, but there's one thing that has to be considered here, and it's a logical necessity that there has to be one source of universal creation called Brahman or spirit. So underlying all existence is this Brahman or spirit. They say this, it's an absolute necessity. It's a singular truth underlying all existence. So in this way, so of course what doesn't allow for the demigods to be called supreme is that they're finite. They're not underlying all existence. They don't serve that purpose. They've got a beginning and an end. So in this way, Srila Vishwanath reveals the intention that's behind this verse spoken by the Shrutis. And I'm going to read the verse again because this is today's verse. And this is the Shrutis talking, the second Shruti talking, glorification of Mahavishnu as he's waking up from his mystic slumber. This Shruti says, this perceivable world is identified with the Supreme because the Supreme Brahman is the ultimate foundation of all existence, remaining unchanged as all created things are generated from it. and at last dissolved into it, just as clay remains unchanged by the products made from it and again merged with it. So this is their referencing the one source of creation, the one source of universal creation. And that is the distinguishing characteristic of the Supreme Brahman. And Srila Vishwanath identifies this intention of the Shrutis by their highlighting the difference between the high position of the demigods and, quote, the greatest, close quote, the truth underlying all existence. So that's what Mahavishnu is allowing, by challenging the Shrutis, is allowing them to make that distinction. There's the distinction between the greatest, the truth underlying all existence, and the position of the demigods that are finite. So we can look at Lord Krishna's explanation of Brahman, because that's the underlying all existence is Brahman or spirit. So this is how Lord Krishna puts it. The total material substance called Brahman is the source of birth, and it is that Brahman that I impregnate, making it possible the birth of all living beings, as Gayan of Bharata. So Krishna himself states it. It's Bhagavad Gita 14.4. He says it, the total material substance called Brahman is the source of birth. And it is that Brahman that I impregnate, making it possible the birth of all living beings. So the explanation given by Srila Prabhupada is that what the Supreme Lord makes possible is the combination of the living entity and material nature. The Mahatattva is the total cause of the total cosmic manifestation. So the total substance, in which there are three modes of material nature, is sometimes called Brahman. So this is a very interesting thing, because you're hearing the total material substance made up of the three modes of material natures is sometimes called Brahman. So by the Supreme Personality of Godhead impregnating the total substance, that's how innumerable universes come to exist. And Srila Prabhupada gives a quote from the Mundaka Upanishad to try and explain this. And this is his quote, 149, Tasmad eta Brahma nama rupam anam cha jayate. And the reason I'm even reading this is because we're dealing with the personified Vedas having been challenged. So we're drawing from them even to, as Srila Prabhupada does, to support the particular point of the Supreme Lord impregnating the total material substance. So this quote that's from the Mundaka Upanishad says that the Supreme Person impregnates that Brahman with the seed of all living entities. So it's directly stated. And Srila Prabhupada puts it this way. It's quite nicely put by him. Into material nature, the supreme nature, the living entity, is mixed by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, you almost visualize a blender or something. There's some substance and you're adding something else. Of course, the effect of a blender is to liquefy everything, so we don't go there. But it's a similar idea that there's this total material substance, the material nature, and then the living entity is injected or put into that material substance by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that is found in Bhagavad Gita 14.4 purport. Srila Prabhupada puts it nicely like that, mixed into by the will of the Supreme Lord. So it's interesting that even Narada had confused his father, Lord Brahma, because this is a problematic thing. This problem of thinking that the demigods could be, the supreme, because they seem to be managing so much. And then that confusion that doesn't allow one to understand that actually there's a total material substance and it's the Lord who's injected the living beings into it. So here's Narada making the same mistake when he speaks to Lord Brahma. So you can see why it's so intelligent, Mahavishnu is challenging the Shrutis. So this is Narada speaking to his father, Lord Brahma. He says, "My dear father, all this is known to you scientifically because whatever was created in the past, whatever will be created in the future, whatever has been created in the present, as well as everything within the universe is within your grip, just like a walnut." This is Narada talking to Lord Brahma. And Srila Prabhupada explains that Lord Brahma, is the direct creator of the manifested universes and everything within the universe. So you can see Narada's, attributing a knowingness, an understanding of time in essence. He's seeing that because Lord Brahma is creating, then he should also know what was created in the past was going to be created in the future. So the living being, the phenomenal world, are all in a kind of continuous action, past, present, and future. And the direct manager is supposed to know everything. So, for instance, to try and understand this, this is explained in a nice analogy of Srila Prabhupada's. Say there's a manufacturing plant. So I suppose, you could have a car manufacturing plant. There are not so many left in the United States. I think there's all abandoned cities where the car manufacturing plants used to exist because it all moved elsewhere. But let's say there's a car manufacturing plant. So one has to understand where you get the ingredients that are going to go into that manufacturing plant. Where do those doors, roofs, glass, handles, or remote controlled buttons, where do they come from? One has to know how to set up the particular components to manufacture a car. And one should also know how the manufactured products are being turned out. So somebody who's dealing with the manufacturing, once the assembly is done, he has to know how the final thing is going to look, and he has to check that it's all in place. I remember years ago when I was very young, I got a car and it wasn't properly assembled and the door just fell. After it was bought, it just fell on the ground. It wasn't properly assembled. So somebody who's overseen the manufacturing has to know how the final product is going to be turned out. So Lord Brahma, is the first created being, and he's supposed to know about the creative process. He's supposed to know how all the ingredients come together, what the final universe is going to look like, who's going to be populating which area. So now returning to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he has the Shrutis responding further to Mahavishnu, and this is how he has the Shrutis responding to Mahavishnu. This entire world, including Indra, Agni, and everything else perceivable by the eyes, ears, and other senses, is identical with the one supreme truth, the personality of Godhead, who is called Brihad the Greatest because he is Avashesha, the ultimate substance that remains. So that the Lord is always the Lord, because that's what they're saying. One perceives so many things in the universe. One even may be able to possibly perceive the demigods, like Indra and Agni. And one has to understand that everything that one perceives is actually the supreme truth, the personality of Godhead. It's actually the supreme personality of Godhead, because he's the underlying basis of everything. So that the Lord is always that substance that remains. Even if things break down, he's the underlying substance of everything. This is reiterated by Lord Brahma to Narada, because remember, Narada made that mistake. He was almost seeing Lord Brahma as the supreme. He's saying, you have a complete understanding of everything. You know what's happened, what was created in the past. You know what's going to be created in the future. This is how Lord Brahma responds to Narada. Just reiterating this point of understanding that actually with everything that one can perceive, there's that foundational part, the supreme absolute personality of Godhead. So, this is Lord Brahma. Whatever you have spoken about me is not false, he tells Narada, because unless and until one is aware of the personality of Godhead, who is the ultimate truth beyond me, one is sure to be in illusion by observing my powerful activity. So Lord Brahma acknowledges, it's true, I can see everything that was created in the past and in the future. But unless you're aware of the personality of Godhead as the ultimate truth beyond me, meaning Lord Brahma is speaking of himself, one is sure to be illusioned by observing his powerful activity. So he sees people could get confused. So that comes from Srimad Bhagavatam 2.3.10. So the soul, or rather, what's arising in Narada's mind about Brahma becoming all-powerful is a lesson that one may not be bewildered as a conditioned soul. Because the bewilderment is that one can misconceive the identity of the Supreme Lord by comparison to a personality like Lord Brahma. You could get confused. So, of course, as Srila Prabhupada points out, no living being, even up to the standard of Lord Brahma, can claim to be one with the Lord. No one can claim that. So the Shrutis continue. This is what they say. There's a famous analogy regarding clay. Midiva. A mass of clay is the ingredient of various pots and statues, but the clay itself remains in its essence unchanged. So even though it's been shaped into some form, the clay is still there in its essence. It may be a clay pot made of clay. The clay itself is unchanged. It's still the essence of that shape that it's been formed into. So eventually the pots and the other objects, they can break, but they return to the clay. That same state from which they came, that same underlying ingredient. So similarly, this is Lord Brahma. He says, similarly, or rather I should say, the Shrutis are trying to comprehend. So they say, similarly, as the Supreme Lord, you are the total ingredient cause. So he's the cause of anything that gets created and shaped. Yet you remain eternally untouched by the generation and dissolution of the universe. So the universe gets created. Lord Brahma does his work of assembling things this way and that way. And eventually, at some point, by the will of Mahavishnu, the universe is getting dissolved. But the Supreme Lord, he's always there. It doesn't matter if this generation and dissolution takes place. And so this is how Lord Vishnu responds to the Shrutis when they give their explanation of what they understand. He says, doesn't that mean I must be subject to transformation? He's asking that. If this whole world's been created and it's been dissolved, doesn't it mean that I also must be transformed in some way? That's a question he asks the Shrutis. So the Shrutis answer this way. No, because you are devoid of transformation. And the word that we read was avikritat. Indeed, it is certainly astonishing that you are not transformed, even though you are the ingredient cause of the universe. So they say, it's astonishing, but actually you aren't transformed. As the great devotee Gajendra prayed, so they use an example of a great personality who came to this understanding. So Namo Namas Tekila Karanaya Nishkaranaya Bhuta Karanaya. Obeisances again and again. So this is Gajendra in a very pitiful position. The elephant with his leg being chewed by a crocodile in the water. And he comes to this understanding. He remembers from his previous life this particular prayer. Obeisances again and again to you, the source of all creation. You are the inconceivable cause of all causes, and of you there is no other cause. So identifying this very unique position of the Supreme Lord. So the King of the Elephants said this in a prayer of surrender. So he's surrendering to the Supreme Lord, and he gives a reason for the understanding that the Lord is the cause of everyone. So this is the reason Gajendra gives for understanding that he's the cause of everyone. And he says, I offer my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Person Vasudev. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Because of him, this material body acts due to the presence of spirit. And he is therefore the root cause of everyone. He is worshipable for such exalted persons as Brahma and Shiva, and he has entered the heart of every living being. Let me meditate upon him. So the reason the Supreme Lord is the cause of everyone is because he's actually entered into every living being. And Gajendra plays, let me meditate upon him. So that comes from the Bhagavatam in the 8th canto, the 3rd chapter. So Srila Prabhupada, he points out that the body consists of material elements. But when one awakens to Krishna consciousness, then the understanding comes. Oh, the Supreme Lord has entered this body made of material elements. And then when one is walking around with that understanding, then the body is no longer material. It's actually become spiritual, just because one's consciousness is altered. So the Shrutis carry this analogy of clay, which was mentioned earlier, and the Supreme Lord. So that's analogy that they made. Even the substance clay remains without change while serving as an ingredient cause, and therefore you are not at all transformed while creating, maintaining, and destroying this universe. So this point of no transformation, because that was the question that Mahavishnu asked. Well, don't I get transformed? If I'm creating and I'm dissolving universes. And they go back to the analogy of the clay. The clay, it remains unchanged, even though it's been put into different forms and these forms get destroyed, still the clay is there. That's, fundamental ingredient. So in the same way, they're saying, you, Mahavishnu, don't get transformed while you create, while you maintain, while you destroy the universes. And the demigods also confirm this. They say, you maintain, create, and annihilate the cosmic manifestation by yourself. And in this conversation between Narada and Lord Brahma that I've been referencing, Lord Brahma does indeed confirm that the Lord does not transform through his work. And this is what Lord Brahma says. The Lord, who is the controller of all energies, thus creates by his own potency eternal time, the fate of all living entities, and their particular nature for which they were created. And he again merges them independently. So imagine the creation. It's extraordinary. He's creating the fate of every living entity. He's creating the nature of every living entity. And again, he merges them when he's dissolving the universes. So independently, they get merged into his being. So very extraordinary. That's from Bhagavatam 2.5. So the whole material and even spiritual creation of the Lord is a manifestation of the energy of the Lord. Just as the light and heat are different manifestations of the fire's energy. So that's another analogy to help one understand. The fire has got a particular energy. Like, if you go by a ghee lamp that's lit, and you see the little flame, there's heat coming from it, and there's light coming from it. So in the same way, the spiritual creation, like everything we perceive, because that was this verse, everything we perceive is actually a spiritual creation because it's got that underlying spiritual substance that is the Lord's presence. So it's analogous to that heat and a light coming from a little flame. So the simile on this point by Srila Prabhupada is that the creation takes place again and again, and it's annihilated again and again under the control of the Lord, just as the many rainy seasons appear and disappear again and again. I guess in our particular place, I mean, maybe we have a windy season in August. It comes yearly in August again and again. So it disappears after August is over, but next August is the windy season again. So, so this is all, this creation and annihilation is all under the control of the Lord. So the point brought by the Shrutis is also made by Srila Prabhupada. The Lord exists in his impersonal form by such expansions of energy, and the complex creation rests on his impersonal feature. That's how Srila Prabhupada puts it. He keeps himself distant from such creation as the complete or Purnam. So he's always present in his personal feature, despite the innumerable, unlimited expansions of impersonal energy or Brahman. So that's the important point that we've tried to reiterate, because it was a question asked by Mahavishnu to the Shrutis, don't I get transformed? So he's always present in his personal feature, despite his innumerable, unlimited expansions of impersonal energy, the Brahman. So Krishna states this himself. So he has from Bhagavad Gita, where he says it himself. And it's Bhagavad Gita 9.5. And yet everything that is created does not rest in me. So notice this. Behold my mystic opulence. Although I am the maintainer of all living entities, and although I am everywhere, I am not a part of this cosmic manifestation. For myself is the very source of creation. So he states it himself. It's quite a mind-boggling concept. He puts it down to his mystic opulence. He maintains all the living entities. He's everywhere, but he's not a part of the cosmic manifestation. So it's very extraordinary. I mean, he's the substance of everything, but his self, his very being, is still aloof from the creation. So Lord Krishna explains the point of not getting transformed himself. He's given that explanation. This is that he doesn't get transformed. He says, myself is the very source of creation. So he's always separate from it in one sense. He's aloof from it. So by saying this, even though he says all living entities are situated in him, this does not mean that they're situated in his original transcendental form. It doesn't mean that. So that's a very important point. Actually, they are situated within his illusory energy. So one may not be able to grasp this truth with one's mundane intelligence, but one can try to understand his supreme opulence in considering the workings of his multi-energies. He's the maintainer of all living entities and the origin of the material manifestation, but he's aloof. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he puts it that way. He specifically puts it that way, that he is the maintainer of all living entities and the origin of the material manifestation, but he is aloof. So that's the understanding. So he does not get transformed. The example he poses is that the mighty wind, although it's blowing throughout the world, is still resting in the spiritual sky. It's got to have a place where it's resting. So in the same way, the living entities are situated in him, in the whole creation, that he's the underlying substance of everything. So the Shrutis continue. I mean, the underlying substance, the Brahman, the spirit, that's his energy. So the Shrutis put it this way: you create, maintain, and annihilate this cosmic manifestation by yourself. We also say the same thing. So Lord Krishna does say this. He says, and this is from Bhagavad Gita 9:7, O son of Kunti, at the end of the kalpa or millennium, all material creation enters my nature. And again, at the beginning of the next kalpa, I create them by my energy. So again, that emphasis is by his energy. So the Shrutis continue. The material nature undergoes change because she is not your internal energy. They give an explanation, which, like you, is never subject to change. So Krishna's internal energy doesn't change. Therefore, the sages, and they then make the conclusion, because Krishna's internal energy doesn't change, the sages have directed their words, minds, and activities to serve you and meditate upon you alone, rather than the separated this is what they were calling the demigods, the separated transformations of nature as Indra and other empowered demigods. So they continue that whatever the Vedas discuss is actually you, meaning Lord Krishna, the cause of all causes and the supreme controller. So we have to understand the reality of things. That's the point. And reality is understood properly when everything is seen to be dependent on Brahman or spirit, the absolute, for its existence. Nothing can exist without the presence of Krishna's energy, Brahman, the spirit. Putting it another way, the objects of the material world, they exist merely as names. So anything, that's how it's put. They're transformations defined by language, whereas the ingredient cause of that object, like the clay pot, etc., is actually the reality. So you have to understand it that way. So I've tried to do it as simply as I could. It was a kind of challenging, very, very long purport. If there's some thought on the subject matter.
we can understand uh, how when these concepts are taken not within the whole context of the prayers can be lead to confusion, especially the whole impersonal thing. Because, say, without Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's breakdown, um, that opens to a much deeper dialogue, then um, one may think, okay, yeah, there is that at the end, everything on that everything that exists, being demigods or being even material nature, is of the same substance. So, so everything is one with that supreme. Although within the context of the prayers of the Vedas, the whole thing is clarified that they're praying to the Lord and they're acknowledging the Lord as the source, and then they will acknowledge the Lord in his personal form as to be focused and glorified as the real. So, although they're also highlighting that that is the all-pervading energy that is underlying everything that exists. So, to have this presentation in which both things are acknowledged, but also the supremacy of the personal feature of the Lord is established, is is necessary and important. And out of context, you definitely won't get that if you take these verses. Some of the verses of the Bhagavad Gita also. Mhm. So, yeah. So just wanted to point out that.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, indeed. It certainly requires that being awakened to Krishna consciousness to be able to perceive the presence of the Lord in his personal form, or the existence of his personal form. So the impersonalist remaining on that level of understanding the presence of the Lord as the underlying substance in all objects, all beings, is accurate. But then one has to awaken to consciousness of the personal form of the Lord, who's the source of that, in order to have the proper understanding. And indeed, one is reliant on the previous acharyas opening up that area of dialogue. So indeed, one is very grateful to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who actually makes it so highly personal that the Vedas, the personified Vedas, are having a conversation with Mahavishnu, who within who creates, you could say, by his energy, all the universes, and of course gives the manufacturing part to Lord Brahma. But yeah, it's very subtle, but it requires that awakening to Krishna consciousness, becoming conscious of the Supreme Lord, um, being the one who impregnates the material manifestation, and his presence as always not being transformed in any way. He remains, he puts it, my, and capital is self, always is there. So, um, yeah, it's that awakening to Krishna consciousness that's essential.
Yeah, and put it into the context of the question, the original question by Maharaj Parikshit and later by Narada.
Yes, that conversation I'm referencing.
So,
Yes.
so then the question is, how can the Vedas describe something that is on this that cannot be described, that is transcendental, that have no form, no substance, and things like that? So the answer is quoted within these prayers, and or the answer is within these prayers that is being narrated by Sukadeva Goswami. And so it's the whole prayers that establish. Because right now, in one sense, this verse highlight that's that um, that there's a transcendental substance, there's a transcendental reality that is beyond all the transformational things that are described by words, but it's just a concept. Words describe things that are changing, that are being transformed. So, so then that is the that is the difficult and could be confusing too. But within the whole prayers, it becomes very clear. I remember one of the things that you mentioned was uh, the description of the Mahatattva, or the sum total of material energy described as Brahman. So that's taking it from the perspective of that, although it's temporary, is at the end it comes from Brahman, so then everything is Brahman at the end. So that can, for impersonalists, it's like music to their ears.
Yes.
Yeah, so you have to be all within this context. So.
Yes, that's why the very intricate breakdown by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, it's a direct dialogue between the personified Vedas, the Shrutis, of which there are 28, so we're going to hear 28 prayers. So this is the second of those 28 prayers. And just see the complexity of this one. The direct dialogue is illustrating the very questions that allow for one to have that kind of Krishna consciousness. The very question Mahavishnu poses to the Shrutis, but am I not being transformed too, also changed? And so then the very intricate response of the Shrutis that no, you don't undergo any transformation, you remain eternally there. And then, just drawing from what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita too, that he's always aloof from the creation. And behold my mystic opulence.
Yeah, but there's still, because they also say your energies, your internal energy doesn't take any transformation either.
Yes.
So at the end, it's going to have to go further to clarify that there's a difference between
the internal and the external energy, there's a
and
difference.
also the energy and the energetic, which is at the end, that's what the Vedas clarify.
Yes. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.